My name is Madison Claire Bennett. I'm 28 years old, live in Chicago, and work in senior financial consulting. People like to call me the responsible one, the glue that keeps the family from cracking at the seams. And for most of my adult life I let them. I believed family was sacred, and that love meant sacrifice. I was wrong. It started with a text from my mother, Ellen. "Dear Madison, come by the house at 6 o'clock tonight. We have something special for you." Something about those words made my stomach twist. In my family, something special usually came wrapped in obligation, like the time they surprised me with a loan agreement for my brother Hunter's failing startup, right after his last one crashed and burned. Still, I told myself maybe, just maybe, they remembered my birthday this year. I drove to the suburban two-story I helped them pay for 4 years ago, the house that legally belongs to them but wouldn't exist without my signature and savings. Through the window, I saw warm yellow lights, the silhouette of bodies moving, laughter. But the kind that made you feel like the punchline. Still, I stepped out, straightened my coat, and rang the doorbell. My mother answered. Red lipstick, pearls, eyes bright in a way that felt rehearsed. "Surprise," she squealed. The living room was packed with relatives I hadn't seen since Christmas 2 years ago. Uncle Henry, Aunt Joan, my cousin Daphne, who only shows up when gifts or drama are guaranteed. "Happy early birthday, Madison," they shouted in unison. I forced a smile. "Wow, you guys really got me," I said. But inside something itched. A kind of tension you feel when you know the spotlight isn't about celebration. It's about setup. They guided me to the center of the room like some kind of show pony. Dad handed me a green cocktail with a grin. "Your favorite, right? Green apple gin." I hadn't liked gin since 25. I took the glass out of politeness and sat down on the couch. Then I saw it. A leather-bound folder on the side table. Intentional. "What's this?" I asked, my fingers already reaching. "Oh, just some boring paperwork," my mom said quickly, placing a hand on mine. "Let's not worry about that now. Tonight's about you." But I had already flipped it open. The title leapt off the page like it had claws. Asset Allocation Agreement. Louise Bennett Inheritance Trust. I scanned the first page, then froze. "I, Madison Claire Bennett, hereby relinquish all rights to the Louise Bennett Inheritance Trust." My voice didn't even tremble. "What is this?" My mother's smile turned plastic. "It's just for tax purposes, sweetheart." "Tax purposes. Ask louder now. Or transferring my grandmother's entire estate into your control without telling me." "Madison, don't," Hunter said. "We've already agreed. Just sign it." And there it was. The real reason for the party. Not candles. Not cake. Just a legally binding ambush disguised as affection. My mother's face hardened. "Don't make a scene. Everyone's here." I looked around. Familiar faces. But none of them really looked at me. Eyes averted. Fingers fidgeting. Even Daphne was scrolling her phone like anything on TikTok was more important than watching me sign away $15 million. I closed the folder slowly, placed it in my lap. Then let everyone hear this. They deserve the truth. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't flinch. This wasn't a birthday party. It was a heist with streamers. Aunt Joan gasped. Uncle Henry shifted uncomfortably. My father stood up, his voice stiff. "Madison, don't do this." "I'm not doing anything." "You are. You lured me here under false pretenses, poured me a drink, and handed me a legal document expecting me to blindly sign. That's not love. That's manipulation." My mom's smile was gone now. Her jaw clenched. "You don't need the money. You're already successful." I laughed, but it wasn't warm. "So that's the logic. Because I earn my own living, I should just give away everything my grandmother left me. Do you even hear yourselves?" My best friend Reagan, who'd come as a +1, stepped beside me. Her face was calm but her eyes steel. "You're not alone in this," she said quietly. I stood up, folder in hand. "You want to manage the trust for convenience. Try being honest about it." But instead you tried to trick me into signing it away. Well, congratulations. Now everyone knows. My mother's voice cracked. If you don't sign, there will be consequences. I turned, looked her in the eye. I've lived with your consequences all my life. Now I choose clarity. I walked out of that house. Not in tears. Not in rage. But with something deeper. Certainty. Reagan and I sat in her car. Headlights cutting through the quiet suburban street. You okay? She asked. Not yet, I replied. But I will be. Then I pulled out my phone, opened the last message my grandmother Louise ever sent me. If things ever start to feel confusing, go see my attorney, Mr. Gerald Price. I left something for you. The next morning I called the office. The office of Gerald Price sat nestled between a florist and an old-fashioned barbershop in a red brick building in downtown Boston. It wasn't flashy. No towering marble columns or sleek modern glass. But it had something better, legacy. The kind my grandmother Louise Olson trusted. I arrived 10 minutes early, my heart pounding harder than any courtroom drama I'd ever seen on TV. The receptionist greeted me kindly and offered tea. I declined. My hands were already sweating. When Gerald Price walked in, I recognized the kind of quiet confidence that comes from someone who's buried more secrets than he's told. He was silver-haired, early 60s, and dressed like he still ironed his pocket squares. He extended a hand. Ms. Bennett, I've been expecting you. He led me to his office. Walls lined with shelves of worn law books, the air carrying the scent of old paper and polished wood. On the desk sat a thick envelope, sealed with red wax. Beside it a USB stick. Your grandmother was thorough, he said gently. She left you a private message and additional instructions. Would you like to see the video now? I nodded, afraid my voice would crack if I spoke. He inserted the USB. The screen on his desk flickered. Then there she was. Grandma. Her silver hair was pulled back in a low bun, her makeup soft, her face pale but fierce. She was sitting in the reading room I remembered from childhood, with the golden armchair and the dusty globe. But this time she wasn't reading bedtime stories. Lauren, her voice began, using my first name in that deliberate way only she did when things mattered. If you're watching this, then things are unfolding just the way I feared. I'm sorry. I gripped the arms of my chair. You were always kind. Never the loud one. Never asked for anything. And that's exactly why I left it all to you. She looked into the camera, her eyes almost trembling. I watched how your mother used guilt to get what she wanted. How your father justified silence. How Hunter. Well, I don't need to tell you. You saw it too. And yet you kept giving. I don't want that life for you anymore. I bit the inside of my cheek. Hard. I've structured the trust so that if anyone tries to coerce you into giving it up, if they even attempt legal action or manipulation, all assets will default to charity. Every last cent. They won't see it coming. But you will. The screen went dark. Then a document appeared, digitally scanned. The original trust. Underlined in red was a clause I hadn't seen before. In the event that Lauren Claire Bennett is pressured or manipulated into forfeiting this inheritance, the trust will be transferred to the following 4 non-profit organizations. Gerald turned to me. They don't know this clause exists. But with your permission I can activate it if needed. Or we can simply proceed with what she wanted. It's entirely your call. I nodded slowly. Can I get a copy of that video? He handed me a fresh USB. There's also another message, he said, pulling out a second drive. This one was intended for your family, should you choose to share it. A plan began forming in my mind. Quiet one. Cold. Surgical. Mr. Price, I said, voice firm now. I'd like to call a family meeting. On my terms. I left the office with both drives in my purse and a fire in my chest I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just anger. It was purpose. That night I texted my mom. I've thought it over. I'd like everyone to come to my apartment tomorrow at 5 p.m. Let's talk. Peacefully. She replied within seconds. Sweetheart, I knew you'd come around. So proud of you. We'll all be there. She had no idea. Reagan and I cleared out the apartment that afternoon. We moved the dining table to one side, brought out a foldable projector screen, and made sure the video loaded smoothly on my laptop. I stood at the center of the room, took a deep breath, and looked around at the space that, until today, had felt like my hideout. Now it would become my arena. At exactly 5 p.m. the doorbell rang. First through the door, my mother wearing a slate gray blazer, pearl earrings, and that smirk she used like armor. Then came my father in a power tie and cologne thick enough to make a statement. Hunter followed, eyes hollow, hands stuffed in his pockets. I greeted them politely. Thank you for coming. My mom stepped in like she owned the place. Where's Madison? She asked. She's right here, I replied. And she's got something to show you. I hit play. The room darkened as the projector lit up. Grandma's face appeared. Her voice rang out clear. If you're watching this, it means Lauren refused to sign. But I hope she wouldn't. This trust was created for her. Not for manipulation. Not for greed. Not for guilt. My mother's smile fell like a curtain. My father shifted. Hunter looked up, stunned. Let me make it very clear, Grandma continued. If any one of you attempts to change the terms, pressure Lauren, or exploit her for access, 50% of the trust will go to charity. Immediately. Irrevocably. You have no legal right to her inheritance. When the screen faded to black, silence swallowed the room. I stepped forward, folder in hand. I know what you tried to do. I know what you were hoping I'd sign. But I also know what Grandma wanted. And I'm here to carry that out. My mother broke first. You're blowing this out of proportion. Or family. We just wanted what's fair. I stared at her. What's fair? You mean tricking me into forfeiting everything under the guise of a birthday party? My father slammed his hand on the table. Enough. We share everything in this family. No, I said. You take everything. And I'm done. I placed printed copies of the trust documents in the center of the table. From this point forward, any attempt to challenge my ownership or manipulate me will activate the clause. I will not hesitate. Hunter whispered. You'd really let the money go to charity just to spite us? No, I said. I'd let it go to protect myself. That's the difference between us. Reagan stood beside me now, arms crossed. You're lucky she didn't press charges for attempted fraud. My mother stood, her voice suddenly brittle. You'll regret this. One day you'll need us. I met her eyes. Maybe. But today, I need something more important than your approval, boundaries. And just like that, I opened the door. They left one by one. Not with slamming doors or shouting matches. But with something far worse. Silence that screamed everything they couldn't say. That night, as I poured a glass of wine and sat beside Reagan, I felt something shift. Not guilt. Not shame. Freedom. The morning after the showdown, my phone buzzed with a call from Gerald Price's office. His assistant was calm, professional. Ms. Bennett, Mr. Price said you might want to stop by again. There are additional materials your grandmother left, and he'd like to go over them with you personally. I thanked her, trying to keep my voice steady. But inside, adrenaline was already dancing across my nerves. I knew what she meant. This wasn't over. Not even close. By 9:30 a.m., I was seated once more in the same leather chair, facing Gerald's desk. This time, though, I felt taller. Firmer. Like I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was preparing. He handed me a thick folder labeled in my grandmother's handwriting. For Lauren, only if necessary. I flipped it open. What I saw inside was not just evidence, it was a bomb. There were bank statements going back more than a decade. Credit card applications made in my name without my knowledge when I was still in college. My parents had used my social security number to open lines of credit they later drained, and paid just enough on to avoid collections. I thought my student loan debt had grown because of tuition interest. Well, they had used my name to pay for vacations, for Hunter's rent, for a series of medical expenses that weren't even mine. There were receipts from luxury stores in New York labeled as family emergencies. Thousands of dollars marked urgent withdrawals from the joint account I had unknowingly been a silent co-signer on, a detail buried in the fine print when I signed a document for tax paperwork at 23. There were even transcripts, audio recordings my grandmother had made in her later years, including one where my mother, Ellen, spoke to someone on the phone about clearing out the trust before Lauren gets too nosy. Gerald looked at me gently. Your grandmother knew. She had this all documented. She told me, Lauren won't act out of vengeance. But if they try to break her, she needs to know she's not crazy, she's right. Tears welled up in my eyes. Not just from betrayal, but from the quiet, steady love of someone who had truly seen me, when no one else had. I ran my fingers along the edge of the folder. This changes everything. It can, Gerald said, if you choose to use it. I took a long breath. I will. But not in court, not yet. First, I want a conversation. One-on-one. 2 days later, I texted my father. Just you. No, Mom. Meet me at Lily's Cafe. 3 p.m. It was the same cafe he used to take me to as a child on Sunday mornings. Pancakes, hot chocolate, and crossword puzzles. But that day there were no crossword games. Just a reckoning. He arrived 10 minutes late, dressed like a man still clinging to authority. Charcoal blazer, gold cufflinks, and a fake smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sorry. Traffic was insane. Save it, I said, motioning to the booth across from me. Sit. I placed the thick envelope between us. He glanced at it warily. What's this? Your history, I replied. In black and white. He hesitated, then opened it. I watched his face shift as each page landed like a blow. Charges, transactions, the transcript, the final page, a summary. Over $186,000 borrowed in my name over 9 years. His face flushed. This is taken out of context. Your mother and I. Don't, I said quietly but firmly. Don't insult both of us. He leaned back, eyes flicking toward the window. So what do you want, Lauren? You going to sue us? I should, I said. But I'm not yet. I'm giving you one chance. One moment of truth. I slid over another document. It was a personal cease and desist. Drafted and notarized. Simple, clear. If either of them tried to access my trust, make a claim, or misrepresent my finances again, I would file charges with both the IRS and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. And I'd win. He skimmed the paper. You've thought this through. I have, I said. But this isn't just about legality. It's about reality. You and Mom have treated me like a resource. Not a daughter. Backup plan. A wallet with a pulse. That ends now. He looked older suddenly. And your mother. She gets the same warning. And she'll listen whether she wants to or not. He paused, then said softly, You were always the smart one. I didn't reply. Because it wasn't a compliment. It was a confession. As he left the cafe, I stayed behind, watching the steam rise from my untouched coffee. Then I pulled out the final item from the folder. A handwritten letter from my grandmother. Dear Lauren, I know this will be hard. But please remember, choosing peace isn't betrayal, it's survival. And choosing yourself is not selfishness. It's how we finally stop the cycle. That night, I sat across from Reagan on the couch, rereading that letter. You're not just surviving anymore, she said. You're finally living. He nodded. But I'm not done. A plan had begun forming in my head. Bigger than rebuttals and warnings. Bigger than financial boundaries. The kind of plan that brings justice in the quietest and loudest way possible. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's exposure. And I was going to give them one final surprise. The idea hit me somewhere between rereading my grandmother's final letter and listening to Reagan tell me for the 100th time that I had nothing left to prove. But it wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about reclaiming the one thing they never thought I'd take back, control. I texted Gerald the next morning. I want to call a final meeting. Everyone. The whole family. But this time at your office. Can we arrange it? He replied within 10 minutes. Yes, I'll prepare everything. When? Monday, 9 a.m. I wanted to feel like a boardroom, not a family brunch. I spent the weekend putting everything in motion. The documents, the footage, the folders labeled with each of their names, not out of courtesy, but out of cold, necessary clarity. This wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be a reckoning. At exactly 8:45 a.m., I walked into Gerald's firm, dressed in a simple navy pantsuit. No makeup but a shade of lipstick my grandmother always called power red. I had the USB drive in my pocket. I didn't tremble. I didn't smile. This time I was the one writing the script. Gerald greeted me with a respectful nod. Everything's ready, Ms. Bennett. The conference room was perfect. Long mahogany table, black leather chairs, projector screen facing the far wall, a tray of untouched coffee and water in the corner. Legal folders placed neatly in front of every seat. My grandmother's final gift of truth, tied with red ribbon. At 9 o'clock sharp, the door opened. My mother entered first, sharp as ever in a slate gray blazer and pearl earrings. Her eyes flicked across the room, calculating. Then came my father, red tie tight around his neck, jaw clenched like he already suspected this wouldn't go his way. And Hunter, last as always, hands deep in his coat pockets, dragging his feet like he was being sent to detention. No one spoke as they sat. Gerald began. Thank you all for arriving on time. Today we'll be watching the final message left by Mrs. Louise Olson, and reviewing the irrevocable legal terms of her estate. Any questions before we begin? Silence. So I stood up, walked to the projector, and inserted the drive. The screen flickered. Then Grandma appeared. But this wasn't the warm goodbye of a loving matriarch. This was war. If you're watching this, it means Lauren held her ground. That means she's ready to hear what you tried to take from her. And what you've been hiding from. I watched as my mother's face paled almost instantly. My father shifted in his seat. Hunter sat up straighter. Ellen Richard, Grandma continued. I know everything. The unreported withdrawals. The misuse of company funds. The times you signed documents in Lauren's name. The fake medical expenses. Every detail, documented and stored. I didn't speak up because I wanted to believe you'd stop. But you didn't. So now I'm the one who will. My mother whispered. No. Barely audible. Grandma's voice stayed calm. I've transferred full ownership of Langston and Hartley, the company your father and I built from nothing, to Lauren. She is the sole heir. Not because of pity but because of proof. She's the only one in this family who hasn't lied. Hunter turned to look at me, eyes wide. What? That's not. I turned to face them. It's already signed, sealed, and filed. I am now the majority owner. Dad's CEO status ends the moment he signs this resignation letter. I slid the envelope across the table. If he refuses, the financial records and tax filings will go to the SEC and IRS this afternoon. My father slammed his hand on the table. This is illegal. It's not, Gerald said smoothly. It's binding. Your mother insured it. I didn't flinch. And if any of you try to challenge it, remember what the trust clause states. 50% of everything will immediately go to 4 named charities. No second chances. My mother stood, lips trembling. You can't do this. I'm not doing it, I said quietly. You did. Years ago. When you treated me like your safety net. Your collateral. Your endless account with no balance sheet. This is just the final invoice. Gerald placed a fresh set of documents in front of them. These include ownership transfers, tax protection clauses, and corporate non-compete notices. Once signed, all legal challenges are waived. My father stared at the page, breathing hard. My mother didn't move. Hunter muttered, "This is insane." I looked him in the eye. You know what's insane? That I paid your tuition, your rent, your failed ventures. And you never once said thank you. You just assumed I would keep giving. But the truth is, You don't owe family everything. Especially not your future. For a moment the room stood still. Then my father reached for the pen and signed. He pushed the paper toward Gerald with shaking hands. You win. No, I replied. I finally stopped losing. As they filed out one by one, my mother with her mouth set in a trembling line, my father silent, and Hunter refusing to look back, I stayed seated. Alone. Gerald looked at me. You're a lot like her, you know. I smiled softly. I hope so. When I returned home that night, I poured myself a cup of tea and walked to the bookshelf. I replaced my father's framed corporate award, which I had taken as a reminder, with one of my grandmother's paintings. A forest path at sunset, lit by fading light. Peace doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it just walks in and closes the door behind the storm. 2 weeks after that final meeting in Gerald's office, I walked into Langston and Hartley, now my company, and stepped into an office that used to belong to my father. His nameplate had already been removed. I hadn't asked for that. The staff did it the day after the resignation went public. I stood in the doorway for a long time just staring. The walls were still the same neutral taupe. The desk still perfectly centered. But the energy, different, lighter, like the room had exhaled. I didn't bring in gold plaques or new furniture. I didn't need to rewrite history with flair. I just replaced one thing, the massive framed portrait of my father with a painting of my grandmother's. A path through a forest, bathed in the last golden rays of the day. I sat down and turned my chair toward the window. Below me, the city moved. People in suits, people chasing deadlines, people who probably had no idea how much can change when you finally decide to choose yourself. But I hadn't come here just to claim a title. I came to build something real. The next board meeting was tense. Course it was. Some of the old guard had been close to my father. They weren't sure what to expect from the daughter who'd been in the background. But I didn't waste time. I opened the meeting by introducing the Louise Olson Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to financial literacy, protection from family-based financial abuse, and scholarships for students with no backup plans but their own grit. 20% of the company's annual profits would be directed into it. Permanently. The room went quiet. One partner finally spoke up. Why tie company revenue to a non-profit? I looked him in the eye. Because if you don't build something that outlasts your name, you're just managing money. My grandmother built something with values. And I intend to keep it that way. The resolution passed. Not unanimously, but by enough. That night, I sat in the foundation's new office space. It was modest. A few desks, some borrowed chairs, a whiteboard full of ideas. But the air buzzed with purpose. We weren't just a charity. We were a lifeline. Reagan walked in late, holding 2 bubble teas. You're officially on Forbes' Young CEOs to Watch list, she said, smirking. They just posted it. I laughed, setting down the folders I was sorting. Did they mention the part where I got ambushed at a fake birthday party? Nope, she said, raising her cup. But they did say your vision balances ethics with edge. Which honestly is kinda sexy. We toasted, not to success but to survival. 2 days later, I received a text from an unknown number. Lauren, it's Mom. Your father just got out of the hospital. We need to talk. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Friday, 3 p.m. My office. You both come to me. When they arrived, my mother looked tired, still polished but frayed around the edges. My father looked older. His face had sunk in, his shoulders slumped. A part of me felt something stir, but it wasn't weakness. It was recognition. Of 2 people who had finally hit a wall. We're not here to ask for money, my mother said immediately. We just want to understand. I sat across from them. Clear. I'm not cutting you off from my life. But I am cutting off your access to my guilt. They said nothing. I slid 2 envelopes across the desk. Inside were lists. Financial counselors, gambling rehab programs, mental health resources. If you want help, I'll pay for these. That's it. No more transfers. No more emergencies. My mother's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the list. Do you think we're horrible people? No, I said. I think you're people who never learned how to stop taking. And worse, never taught me how to say no. My father spoke quietly. Seeing you here, like this, maybe your grandmother was right. I didn't nod. I didn't thank him. I'd stopped chasing their approval. But I let the moment pass without fury. That was my victory. They left in silence. No hugs. No parting shots. Just the quiet understanding that something fundamental had changed. Maybe forever. That evening, I returned to the Foundation's office. The team was preparing for a seminar. How to recognize financial manipulation inside your own family. I stayed in the back, watching students laugh over free pizza and talk about futures they weren't afraid of anymore. I didn't announce myself. I didn't need to. Reagan found me by the coffee table, holding a stack of flyers. Word is Hunter's younger sister just signed up to volunteer. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Yeah, she said, sipping her tea. Seems like the next generation might be learning. Smiled. Good. Maybe that's the real inheritance. She handed me a draft of the Foundation's website. We need a quote for the About Us section. I thought for a moment, then wrote, "We believe family should never be a place where you fear your finances. And real love never comes with a price tag." Reagan nodded. Perfect. Your grandma would be proud. I looked around the room, felt the calm in my chest. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running from anything. I wasn't carrying anyone. I was building something. And I was finally home. Not in a house, but in a truth I had created for myself. 3 weeks after reclaiming my inheritance, my company, and my peace, I was invited to speak at a youth conference in downtown Chicago. The theme was When Family Hurts, Rewriting the Narrative. First I hesitated. I wasn't a speaker. I didn't do microphones or stages. I was the one who stayed behind the scenes, fixing the numbers, covering the bills, cleaning up other people's messes. But something inside me said, this time speak. I stepped onto the stage in a small auditorium packed with high schoolers, college students, and young professionals. Many had stories like mine, stories they hadn't told or didn't yet know how to. The spotlight felt strange but not heavy. Not anymore. I took a deep breath. My name is Lauren, I began using the name I'd reclaimed, and maybe the most important thing I'll say today is this. You are not selfish for choosing to protect yourself. The room went still. I used to be my family's financial lifeline. Not because I was the richest, but because I was the most responsible. That made me easy to manipulate. They called me the good one, the smart one, the steady one. But behind the compliments were expectations I never agreed to. I covered credit cards I didn't open, paid off debts I didn't owe. And every time I asked why, the answer was the same. Because we're family. I let the silence sit. And for a long time I believed them. I believed that saying no was cruel. That boundaries were betrayal. That the only way to be loved was to keep giving, even when it cost me everything. In the front row, I saw a young man with his head bowed, his hands clenched in his lap. A girl in the third row had her eyes fixed on mine, not blinking. I knew that look. I'd worn it too. I used to think peace meant keeping everyone else happy. But peace built on guilt. I shook my head. It never lasts. I glanced toward the corner of the stage, where Hunter stood. Yes, Hunter. My brother. He had asked quietly a few days before the event if he could come. Said he wasn't ready to speak yet, but he wanted to understand. That was enough for me. I'm not here because I won a legal battle, I said. I'm here because I stopped sacrificing myself in the name of loyalty. And if there's one thing you take away today, let it be this. Real family is not who you were born to. It's who chooses to respect you. I stepped off the stage to a standing ovation. But it wasn't the applause that stuck with me. It was the girl who caught my arm near the lobby and whispered, "Thank you for saying what I couldn't." That night, back at the Foundation office, I stayed late. A lamp glowed over my desk as I flipped through letters from students, donors, volunteers. One, written in pencil, was from a high school junior. My dad made me feel like I owed him everything. Now I know I don't. Now I know I'm not alone. Reagan walked in just after midnight, balancing 2 cups of hot chamomile. You should sleep. I will, I said, smiling as I folded the letter and placed it into a binder labeled Stories That Matter. She sat down beside me. Would you answer if your mom called again? Pause. Not because I'm angry, I said, but because I understand. Every time I open that door again, I give them another chance to take what took me years to reclaim. She nodded. Peace. I nodded back. Peace. But it wasn't the kind handed to you. It was the kind you carve for yourself out of hurt, truth, and finally choice. The next morning I received a message from Hunter. Thanks for letting me be there. I'm sorry for everything. If there's a place I can start helping, even just behind the scenes, let me know. I replied simply. Everyone starts somewhere. Sometimes the people who hurt you aren't evil. They're just broken. But healing doesn't mean returning to the same dynamic. Healing means you get to choose how, or if, they stay in your life. That weekend we launched our first digital campaign. #UN. It went viral. People from around the world sent their stories. Of betrayal, guilt, boundary-breaking parents, siblings who expected sacrifices, partners who held financial love hostage. We didn't preach. We didn't shame. We just held space. By Monday, the foundation's inbox had over 4,000 messages. And I knew. This was only the beginning. Autumn came slowly to Boston that year, like it had been holding its breath. Leaves turned gold and copper, and the air grew sharp in that way that makes you want to wrap yourself in soft things. For the first time in years, I wasn't dreading the season change. Because this time I didn't feel stuck. I felt anchored. The Louise Olson Foundation was thriving. We'd expanded our financial protection workshops to 5 cities. Dozens of universities had partnered with us. Our first scholarship cohort had just been accepted to schools across the country, most of them first-generation college students. But more than the numbers, it was the people. The faces. The emails that began with, "I never thought someone would understand," and ended with, "But now I have hope." And still I stayed quiet about my own name. About who I was behind the foundation. I didn't want pity or praise. Until I received a letter that changed everything. It came in a pale blue envelope. No return address. Inside was a single handwritten page. Slanted, elegant cursive I hadn't seen since I was a girl. Lauren, if you're reading this, it means you've walked through the storm and didn't let it claim you. I never knew how to protect you while I was alive without becoming the villain of your story. So instead I gave you the tools, and hoped you'd one day forgive me for not fighting louder. I chose you not because you needed the inheritance, but because I saw who you could become if you ever remembered who you were. Let this be the last gift I give you. The permission to tell your story out loud. Not to shame anyone, but to free someone else. With love always, Grandma Louise. I stared at that letter for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called our media director. I want to write a piece, I said. Personal. The full story. 3 days later, I published a blog post on the foundation's site titled The Truth Behind the Trust. A CEO's story of family, fraud, and finding freedom. I wrote every word myself. No ghostwriters. No edits for optics. Just truth. I wrote about the fake birthday party. Folder. The manipulation. The silent debts and invisible bruises that come from being the good one. I wrote about how I almost signed everything away. And how I didn't. I ended it with the words. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is refuse to be used, even if it means walking away from everything familiar. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe them your peace. You owe yourself the truth. It exploded overnight. Within 72 hours, it had been shared over 60,000 times. I was invited to speak at universities, women's forums, financial ethics panels. But the message was always the same. You're not alone. And then came the one invitation I hadn't expected. Hunter reached out again. This time not with an apology but with an idea. I want to help organize a workshop, he wrote. Not just about boundaries but about forgiveness. For those of us who were on the other side of the damage. If that's okay. And you know what? It was. Because healing doesn't mean you forget. It means you no longer live in the story they wrote for you. You write your own. That spring, Hunter and I shared the stage for the first time. He spoke first. Raw, shaky, but honest. He said, I used to think Lauren's success was a resource. That her love came with a blank check. I didn't understand what I was doing. But that doesn't excuse it. And I'm here to say I was wrong. The room held its breath. Then I spoke. Forgiveness, I said, is not about erasing the past. It's about deciding the future won't be written by it. That night, Reagan and I walked through Boston Common under strings of twinkle lights. The air was warm, soft. My steps felt light. You ever think about what life might have looked like if they'd never tried to take it all from you? She asked. Smiled. Then I might never have built this. She nodded. Good answer. The next morning I returned to the foundation office early. No meetings. No press. Just me, a cup of coffee, and Grandma's painting behind my desk. I opened a drawer and pulled out her last handwritten letter, the one I'd never made public. If the day comes when you must choose between keeping your family and keeping yourself, remember, real family will never ask you to lose who you are. Choosing yourself isn't abandonment. It's how you become whole. I placed the letter back inside, closed the drawer and looked around. This piece was never handed to me. It was earned. Brick by brick. Boundary by boundary. Choice by painful, necessary choice. And for the first time in my life, I could say this with no fear. I don't owe anyone my silence. I don't need permission to be happy. This story, my story, is mine. And I will never apologize for surviving. Or for thriving. Final thoughts from Revenge Echoes. Lauren's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is walk away. Not in anger, but in truth. That family is not built on guilt. And love should never require the erasure of self. The real inheritance, dignity, and the unshakable right to choose peace. You don't owe them your breakdown just to prove you loved them enough. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe for more powerful stories from Revenge Echoes. Share it with someone who needs to hear. You are not alone. And if you've ever had to choose yourself, tell us in the comments. Your truth matters.